Lemuria Atlantis Archipelago Book. Part 3. Santo Saba Works. Created as a discourse to scientists based on academic studies and studies. In an effort to restore the true history of Indonesia. About the Ad and Atlantis in a summary of some mythology. We will be able to find a description of the people of Ad and Atlantis in the most ancient traditions of various races. The great king of Musliman was Shed Ad ben Ad, or Shed Ad, son of Ad, or Atlantis. Among the Arab first inhabitants of the land were known as the Adites, from their ancestor, called Ad, Ham's grandson. These Adites may be the people of Atlantis or Adlantis. They are personified by a king who is considered to be of his ancestral origin, and given several centuries of life after his. In the book, The Ancient History of the East, Lenormand and Chevalier, Volume 2, page 295. They came from the northeast. He married 1,000 wives, had 4,000 sons, and lived 200 years. His offspring multiplied. After his death, his sons Shaddad and Shaddad reigned as successors to Adites. In the past, the people of Ad were 1,000 tribes, each consisting of several thousand men. The great conquest is associated with Shaddad. He was very powerful and authoritative, it is said, all as the predecessors of the Arabs and Iraqis. The migration of the Canaanites, the establishment of civilization in Syria, and the shepherds' invasion of Egypt are, by many Arab writers, attributed to and preceded by this expedition of Shaddad. Ibid. Page 296. Shaddad built a palace decorated with extraordinary columns, and was surrounded by a magnificent garden. It's called Iram. It was a heaven that Shaddad constructed in imitation of the heavenly, which he had heard of. Ancient History of the East, page 296. In other words, an ancient race that worshipped the sun, with a great procession of ritual worship, then conquered Arabia early in history. They were the children of Atlantis. Their king tried to make a palace and Garden of Eden like Atlantis. The Adites are remembered by the Arabs as a great and civilized race. They were depicted as men of enormous stature, their strength equal to their size, and able to easily move large stones. They were excellent architects and builders. They erected many monuments high out of their strength, and so, among the Arabs, there was a custom to call the remaining large stone ruins the Adi people building. To this day the Arabs say, the Ad. In the Quran they are said to have made the buildings they built on high places for nothing, phrases which prove that their idolatry was thought to have been colored with the culture of Sabism or star worship. Quote, Lenormand. In this legend, we find traces of a high civilization, a large constructor of buildings, with an advanced civilization, similar to Chaldea, which had a religion similar to Babylon. Material progress was aligned with great immorality and obscene rites. These facts must be true in true history, for everywhere they met the Ethiopians, among the Canaanites their brethren came. Also a great calamity that destroyed the entire Adite nation, except for the few who fled because they had left idolatry. Black clouds covered their area where the whole region was with a great storm and a great flood, which wiped out everything. The first Adites were followed by the second Adites, perhaps this second Adite people who have escaped from the great disaster. The center of its power is the Sheba Empire. The Adites survived for 1,000 years. The remains of the Adites people can be seen from the existing monuments in Egypt as well as the Egyptians themselves. Their hair is red or sunburnt. Their large shrine is a pyramid building. Ancient History of the East, page 321. Agatharchides on the Sabians, from the book De Mari Erythreo, p. 102. Their homes were extraordinarily decorated, and utensils of all kinds, gold and silver, bedding and silver, and all furnishings of astonishing wealth. The buildings they owned were with columns covered in gold, or silver. On the frieze, the ornaments, and the door frame in which they put the gold plates of precious stones. Quote, all this brings to mind one of the descriptions given by the Spaniards of sun temples in Peru. The people there worshipped Phoenician gods with slightly changed names. Their religion was the sun worship chief. It was originally a religion without form, without idolatry, and without the priesthood. Ibid. p. 325. They worshipped the sun from the top of the pyramid. They believed in the immortality of the soul. In all this we see the resemblance to Atlantis. The great Ethiopian or Kushite Empire, which in the earliest times, as Mr. Rawlinson put it, from the Caucasus to the Indian Ocean, from the shores of the Mediterranean Sea to the mouth of the river Ganges, was the empire of Dionysus, the kingdom of Atlantis. El-Eldrasi called the language spoken today by Mara Arabs, in East Arabia, the language of the Ad people, and Dr. J. H. Carter, in Bombay Journal of July, 1847, said, "This is the softest and sweetest language I have ever heard." It would be interesting to compare this dialect with Central American languages. The Egyptian god Thoth was a god called Athathas. We turn to another ancient race, the Indo-European family, the Aryan race. In Sanskrit Adam, it means first. Among Hindus people call the first person as Ad Ima, his wife is Heva. They live on an island, said to be Sri Lanka. They left the island and came to the mainland. When a great natural disaster occurred, their communication with the parents' land was forever cut off. This is recorded in the Bible in India. Here we seem to have memories of the destruction of Atlantis. Bryant said, Ad was the first. The Persians call the first person, Adamah. Adon is one of the names of the Phoenician high god. From that comes the name of the Greek god, Adonis. Listed in Arv Genesis or Ar-Ad of the Cushites, now known as Ru-Ad. It is a series of cities connected 12 miles along the coast, filled with ruins of the greatest and most majestic of ever. Sir William Jones says the people were Persians at the earliest times. He said, Moshan assures us that the opinion of his predecessor is that the first king of Iran, and all the earth, is Mashab-Ad, which he received from the Creator, and recorded among several scriptures, in the heavenly language, used by the author Musselman, gives the Arabic title, Dasatir, or Regulations. Mashab-Ad, in the opinion of the ancient Persians, the one who was left behind at the end of the last great cycle of his people. At first the king of Atlantis. The naming seems to be seen in these ancient gods grouped together as Aditya, and in this name, Aditya, we find a strong resemblance to the Semitic culture as Adites, and other stories about Atlantis, or Adlantis. In corroborating this view, we can conclude 1. The deities grouped together as Aditya are the most ancient in Hindu mythology. 2. They were all gods of light, or sun gods. Whitney's Oriental Studies and Linguistics, page 39. 3. There are 12 of them. 4. These 12 deities preside over the 12 months of the year. 5. They are an uptake from a very remote past. Whitney, it looks like this is an attempt by Indian religion to make new developments morally. 6. Direction, which is a change in the character and condition of society that has caused it to fail in the middle, and returns to forgetfulness, although it is not half finished and unclear. 7. These gods were called sons of Aditi, just as in the Bible we find the similarity in naming sons of Adab, who were the originators and first musicians. Aditi is not a goddess as the queen's daughter, she is a fair child. 8. Aditya is exalted above all imperfection, they do not sleep or blink. The Greeks regarded as representing God, they were both awake and all-knowing. Their character is all truth, they hate evil. We have seen the same traits the Greeks had for the kings of Atlantis. 9. The sun is sometimes referred to as Aditya. 10. Among Aditya is Varuna, the equivalent of Uranos, who identifies with Atlantis. In the Veda, Varuna is the god of the seas. Aditya represents an earlier and purer form of religion, while in the long spiritual chant of prayer to the other gods, life, wealth, strength, to Aditya is generosity, forgiveness of sins, freedom from guilt, and repentance. Oriental and Linguistic Studies, page 43. Aditya, like the Adites, identified with the doctrine of the immortality of the soul. Yama is the god of living outside. In Persian stories he appears as Yima, and is made ruler of the Golden Age and founder of heaven. Ibid. Page 45. C. Zamna, page 167 ante. Given all these facts, one cannot doubt that the legends of the sons of Ad, people of Adites, and people of Aditya, all refer to Atlantis. George Smith, in the account of the Chaldeans and of creation, page 78, which is elaborated from the Babylonian version, shows that there was an original human race at the beginning of Chaldean history, a dark race, the Zalmat Kakadi, called Ad-Mi, or Ad-Ami. They are a fallen, an opposite to the Saku, or light race. The fall probably refers to their destruction by the Great Flood, as a result of moral degradation and the wrath of the gods. The name Adam is used in legends, but as the name of a race, not men. Genesis chapters 3:2 clearly says that God created human male and female, and called their name Adam. That is, these people are Ad-Ami, the people of Ad, or Atlantis. The author of the book of Genesis says M. Schobel, in speaking of people being swallowed up by calamity, always describes them as Hadam, Adamite men. Cain's race lived and reproduced far from the land of Seth, in other words, away from a land devastated by disaster. Josephus, who gives us an account of the primitive tradition of the Jews, tells us chapter 2p.42, that Cain traveled in many countries, before he came to the land of Nod. The Bible does not tell us that Cain's race died by calamity. Cain comes out of the presence of the Lord, he does not call his name. Those who are destroyed are sons of Jehovah. Quote, all this shows that the great colony was dispatched by a civilization source before sinking into the sea. Across the ocean we find Guatemalans claiming their descent from a goddess called a Tit, or an ancestor who lived for 400 years, and first taught to worship the true God, which they later forgot. Bancroft's Native Races, Volume E, page 75. While the famous Mexican calendar stone indicates that the sun was commonly called Tonatiuh, but at that time it was called the god of disaster, it was later called Atl Tonatiuh, or Adonasiah. Valentini's Mexican calendar stone, Maya Archaeology, page 15. Thus we find the sons of Ad at the foundation of all the most ancient human races, namely the Hebrews, Arabs, Chaldeans, Hindus, Persians, Egyptians, Ethiopians, Mexicans, and Central Americans. Historical testimony shows that all of these races when traced back to Atlantis. It can be concluded that the Adites known to the Arabs were not the first AAD people but were the human remains who survived the AAD disaster and moved to South Arabia. This actually corresponds to the verse of the Quran. And that he is God, who has the Shira star, and that he destroyed the first people of Ad, and the people of Thamud. So no one is left alive. And the Noah before that. Indeed they are the most despotic and most ungodly. Surah an-Najm, 49-52. And it is possible that the AAD people also have ritual worship of celestial bodies, for example the star Sirius. If we examine the Adites who landed in South Arabia eventually developed into the Sabaean people who we know worship the sun. The 11,000-year-old Göbekli Tepe site, the same as Plato's time of the destruction of Atlantis, also seems to cult the star Sirius. We can see the similarities in the stories that come from the scriptures as follows. 1. According to the Bible, the founder of the Tower of Babel is Nimrod the son of Cush bin Ham bin Noah, while according to the Book of Jubilee the Tower of Babel is 2,484 meters high. This is the tallest building in the world and no one has matched it to date. 2. According to the Quran, the AAD people erected very high pillars which had never been made before on earth. 3. According to Greek mythology, Atlas supports heaven and earth and is symbolized by towering pillars touching the sky. Father of Atlas according to Greek mythology is Iapetus, who is probably Euphits bin Na. Meanwhile, according to Plato, the father of Atlas was Poseidon, who was probably Sidon bin Canaan bin Ham bin Noah. 4. According to Indian mythology, Kashyap is the father of the Adityas, who are also known as the Devas. Kashyap was probably Cush bin Ham bin Noah, while the Adityas were probably Aads. Kashyap's wives were the children of Prajpati or Euphits Binna. 5. So the Aad people are probably the descendants of Euphits and Ham. This also fits the biblical narrative where the founder of the Tower of Babel is Nimrod, the son of Cush bin Ham bin Noah. It is also in accordance with the Arab legend that the Adites Aad are the descendants of Ham bin Na. So the Adityas from Indian mythology were probably Nimrod and his people who built the Tower of Babel, which has a height of 2,484 meters. This is what the Quran says as the Aad people who built the pillars of Aram, which had never been made before on this earth. And this is what is called Atlas in Greek mythology, which is also famous for its pillars that touch the sky, and Atlas is also the son of Iapetus or Euphits bin Noah. 6. The Aad people are destroyed by the wind according to the Quran. According to the Bible, the Tower of Babel was also destroyed by the wind. According to Indian mythology, Indra, the leader of the Adityas Devas, is the lord of storms and lightning. According to Greek mythology, the Titans, a group of giants of which Atlas is one, were destroyed by Zeus, the lord of storms and lightning. 7. The Aad people are described as people who are proud of their strength and like to torture ruthlessly and cruelly, or it can be said that the Aad people have the characteristics of the colonialists, imperialists. In the Bible it says, God raised Euphits bin Noah and his descendants. And he will live in the tents of Sam bin Noah and his descendants. And Canaan bin Ham bin Noah and his descendants will be his servants. 8. In Indian mythology, the Adityas Devas are revered and worshipped. In Greek mythology, the Titans, of which Atlas is one of them, are a group of giants who had ruled the world. After that, because of the cruelty of Cronus, the leader of the Titan, Zeus held a confrontation and defeated the Titans. As additional information from Indian mythology, there is a story of the Patala area, which is the area where the Asuras lived. The Patala area is divided into 1. Atala, 2. Vitala, 3. Sutala, 4. Talatala, 5. Mahatala, 6. Rasatala, 7. Patala, Nagaloka. One of the areas of Patala, Atala, is very similar to the pronunciation of Atlantis. Aram, or the Tower of Babel, or the Pillars of the Atlas. In Indian mythology there is the story of Mount Meru, which is described as very high. And it turns out that in the early 20th century a Hungarian nationality Marek Orlstein found Dunhuang manuscripts, which are thought to be from the 2nd century AD in the cave, 1,000 Buddhas. Interestingly, one of the documents describes the Mount Meru as a tower. Could this be the true form of Meru, mountain, which is a very tall tower, which is also called Tower of Babel? Aram in Hebrew means shining, i.e., the inhabitants of Aram who have tall buildings. Surah al-Fajr 7. It can be interpreted that residents of a luminous city have tall buildings. This is similar to the description of a modern metropolis. When we turn to Hinduism, we still find this king of Atlantis. In Sanskrit books we find references to a god called Devanahusa, whom scholars have identified with Dionysus. He is connected with the oldest history and mythology in the world. He is said to have become contemporary with Indra, the king of Meru, who was also deified, and who appears in the Vedas as the main form of the highest representation. The warm colors of the imagination used in depicting the greatness of Devanahusa. For the time he controlled the sovereign affairs of Meru, he conquered 7 Dvipas, and led his armies through all known countries in the world, by means of unmatched wisdom and miraculous heroism, make his kingdom universal. Quote, here we see that the great god Indra, the chief deity of the Hindus, was formerly king of Meru, and that Devanahusa de Va. Nushas, de Anishas, has also been king of Meru, and we must remember that Theopompus told us that the island of Atlantis was inhabited by Meropes. Lenormand has reached the conclusion that the first people in the ancient world were the Mero people. The Vedic religion does not recognize idols, said Max Muller. Paganism in India is a secondary formation, a degradation of the more primitive worship of the ideal god. It is pure solar worship, as was true in Peru at the arrival of the Spaniards. It fits Plato's description of the religion of Atlantis. In the religion, Atlantis had reached all the great minds that underlie modern beliefs. They have reached the universal, omnipotent conception of the great first cause. Atlantis had worshipped this one god in Peru and early Egypt. They saw the sun as a symbol of this mighty, kind, and apparatus of this one god. Such a conception can only come with an advanced civilization. It is then that science has realized the dependence of all earthly life on sunlight. The people of Atlantis had believed that the human soul is immortal, and that it will live again in its material body. In other words, they believed in bodily resurrection and eternal life. They were accordingly embalmed by those who died. The Duke of Argyll, The Unity of Nature, says, we have found in the most ancient records evidence of the Aryan language that indications of higher, simpler, and purer religious thought as we go back in time, To the end, in the very oldest composition of the human voice that has come down to us, we find the divine spoken in sublime language which forms the opening of the prayer. The city of Atlantis, according to Plato in the Critias text, has buildings covered with gold because it deserves to be called a city of light, Aram. Or it could be the possibility that the civilization of Atlantis had advanced technology so that it had lighting technology so that at night the city looked radiant. If we look at the description of the Tower of Babel, the Aad people, from the Bible Genesis chapter 11, it is located somewhere in the east called Shinar. Try to compare it with the description of Aram in Hebrew, which also means to shine, shine. Meanwhile, the word, Sinar, in the Malay language is similar to the word, Shinar, quoted by the Bible. Even the direction is to the east, assuming that the prophet Noah's ark landed in a place in the Middle East. The east direction from the Middle East leads to the Asian continent. As written in the book, Horizio Nunes dos Santos, Atlantis, the Lost Continent Finally Found, and Dr. Danny Hillman's latest book, Plato No Lying, both of which indicate that the location of Atlantis is in Indonesia. If we pay attention to the words, "Did you build on any high ground buildings to play around?" in QSAC Saiwara 128. Actually, this is similar to the description of Atlantis, which also has many plateaus according to Plato in the Critias text. The whole country was said by him to be very lofty and precipitous on the side of the sea. However, the description of the destruction of the people of Aad by wind and lightning is not the same as the description of the destruction of Atlantis by Plato in the Critias text, which is described as occurring in one day by earthquakes and floods. This disaster, in my opinion, is more similar to the disaster that befell Thamud. Because of that they were stricken by an earthquake, so they were the corpses that were lying in their residences. Surat al-Araf verse 78. According to the Quran, these Thamud were the direct heirs of the Aad people and also acquired their land. And remember when God made you successors, who ruled after the people of Aad and gave your place on earth. You build palaces on the level ground and cut into the mountains for houses. Then remember the blessings of Allah and do not be rampant on earth making damage. Surah Al-Araf 74. Thamud's specialties were that they liked to carve mountains to make their homes. Many people think that such buildings only exist in Makkah and Salah, Saudi Arabia, even though there are similar buildings in various parts of the world. Like the prophet Noah, who were scattered throughout the earth, the Aad and Thamud people seemed to be spread globally in all corners of the earth. It is possible that the Aad people were the first generation Atlanteans who were destroyed by the wind, while Thamud were the second generation Atlanteans who were destroyed by an earthquake according to Plato's description in the Critias text. And if we pay attention to the words, "You build palaces on the flat lands," in QS al-Araf 74, the words, "flat lands," are similar to Plato's description in the Critias text, of the flat plains of Atlantis. And the Critias text also tells how Poseidon turned the hill from the center of the city of Atlantis into a circle of fortresses that flowed water between them. This is in principle the same as Thamud's mountain sculpting skill. Interestingly, there is the legend of Mount Shasta in the US, which tells the story of a civilization left by Lemuria, which about 11,000 years ago fled, due to a terrible disaster in Lemuria, into Mount Shasta. It is said that the civilization built an underground city on Mount Shasta. This ability is similar to the ability of Thamud, Prophet Salah, who could carve a mountain into a place to live. The disaster that befell Atlantis is estimated to have occurred about 11,000 years ago. This is a very interesting coincidence. Are Lemuria and Atlantis the same? Some sources claim that Atlantis was the successor of Lemuria. We know Thamud was the successor of the Aad. Is Lemuria referring to the civilization that was first built by the Aad? Does Atlantis refer to the Thamud civilization? When will the Aad people appear on Earth, and where is the location of this Aad civilization? Let's follow the next explanation about Lemuria. Map showing Lemuria at its greatest extent, from The Story of Atlantis and the Lost Lemuria, by W. Scott Elliott. The maps in this book are based on the original document of Theosophist Charles W. Leadbeater. Lemuria. Researchers place the era of the Lemurian civilization around the period 75,000 BC 11,000 BC. The idea that the Lemuria continent existed before the civilizations of Atlantis and ancient Egypt is derived from his explanation of the work of Augustus Le Plongeon (1826–1908), a researcher and writer in the 19th century who conducted research on ancient Mayan sites in Yucatan. This information was obtained after the success of translating several sheets of ancient Mayan records. From the translation results, some information was obtained which showed that the Lemurians were indeed older than their ancestral civilization, Atlantis. Le Plongeon, in the book, The Lost Continent, was later popularized by James Courcouard (1851–1936), in a series of books, starting with Lost Continent of Mu, The Motherland of Man, 1926, re-edited later as the title, The Lost Continent Mu, 1931. Other popular books in this series are The Children of Mu, 1931, and The Sacred Symbols of Mu, 1933. Churchward gives a clear picture of Mu as an advanced civilization. The Nokal, which flourished between 50,000 and 12,000 years ago, was dominated by the white race, and excelled in many ways. At the time of the collapse, about 12,000 years ago, Mu had reached 640,000 inhabitants and scattered in several major cities. Churchward claims that the mainland Mu lies in the Pacific Ocean, and stretches east-west from Marianas to Easter Island, and north-south from Hawaii to Mangaea. He stated that according to the myth, the creation of the continent and the Mu civilization was due to underground volcanic gas on the seabed which later emerged into the continent. Finally, Mu, because of this civilization's volcanic natural disaster, almost disappeared in one-night disaster, after a series of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Churchward claims that Mu is the origin of great civilization from Egypt, Greece, Central America, India, Burma and others, including Easter Island, and in particular the source of ancient megalithic architecture. As evidence for this claim, he points to symbols from all over the world, where he sees the common depiction of the bird, as well as the forms that often exist in depictions of the relationship between earth and sky, and especially the sun. Kumari Kondam is a sunken kingdom that is sometimes identified with Lemuria, a result of G. Devanian's observations. In observing the Tamil epic Salapatakaram and Manimekalai and describing the city of Puhar as a submerged Mu civilization, G. Devanian thought that race Dravidians came from the southern region which is now the coast of South India which sank due to flooding. There are various claims by Tamil authors that there is a large landmass connecting Australia to the Tamil Nadu coast. Among them, R. Mathivanan, chief editor of the Tamil Nadu Government Tamil Etymology Dictionary Project, in 1991 was claimed to have solved the Mu puzzle, based in the Tamil undecipher Ed Indus script. Also following the methodology recommended by his teacher Devania Pavanar, he presented the following timeline quoted after Mahadevan 2002, ca. 200,000 to 50,000 BC. 1. The development of Tamilian or Homo Dravidian, ca. 200,000 to 100,000 BC, the beginnings of Tamil or 50,000 BC. 2. Kumari Kondam civilization 20,000 BC. 3. A lost Tamil culture, Easter Island which had an advanced civilization of 16,000 BC. 4. Lemuria submerged 6087 BC. 5. Tamil Sangam was founded by King Pandya 3031 BC. 6. A Shera prince wandering in the Solomon Islands saw wild sugar cane and began cultivating in Hadir Tamil Nadu. 1780 BC. 7. Second Tamil Sangam was founded by the 7th century BC King Pandya Tolkapayam, known as the earliest Tamil grammar. Lemuria. Based on archaeological evidence and several theories put forward by researchers, it is likely that these civilizations were located in the Pacific Ocean, around present-day Indonesia. Many archaeologists believe that the Easter Island or the mysterious Easter Island is part of the continent of Lemuria. This is when viewed from the hundreds of colossal stone statues that surround the island and several ancient records engraved on several artifacts that refer to the remains of advanced civilizations in the past. The hereditary mythology of the Maori and Samoan tribes who settled on the islands around the Pacific Ocean also mentions that once upon a time there was a large landmass in the Pacific which was destroyed by the tidal waves, tsunami, but before that their nation had been destroyed more was the result of war. The state of Lemuria itself is described as being very similar to the civilization of Atlantis, having fertile land, a prosperous society, and mastery of several profound branches of science. These factors are certainly a basic foundation for the Lemurian nation to develop rapidly into an advanced civilization and have many experts or scientists who can create a new breakthrough in their science and technology. As many spiritual experts and archaeologists have pointed out, the Lemurian and Atlantean people used crystals intensively in their lives. Edgar Cayce, an American spiritualist, through his psychology, repeatedly expressed the same thing. The temples of Lemuria and Atlantis placed a giant generator crystal surrounded by other crystals, both as a source of energy and for various healing purposes. Much information about Atlantis and Lemuria has been obtained by channeling old soul crystals that were used during both ages. Several mysterious stone monuments have been found under the waters of Yonaguni, Japan. Could it be that these monuments are the remains of the Lemurian civilization? However, in contrast to the Atlanteans who relied more on physics, technology, and liked to fight, the Lemurians were believed to be humans with a high evolutionary and spiritual level, very peaceful and moral. According to Edgar Cayce, the emergence of Atlantis as a superpower civilization at that time, if it now resembles the United States, that is made them eager to conquer the nations of the world, including Greece and Lemuria, which the Atlanteans saw as strong civilizations. Armed with sophisticated war equipment and a good war strategy, Atlantis's invasion of Lemuria went as expected. Due to the nature of the Lemurians who uphold the concept of peace, they were not equipped with the advanced war technology of the Atlanteans, so that in an instant, Lemuria fell into the hands of Atlantis. The Lemurians, who are in a state of urgency, ultimately leave the Earth to find new places to live on other planets that have Earth-like characteristics. Maybe they don't know their whereabouts at this time. Some say they currently live on the planet Terra in the Pleiades star cluster. Closing parenthesis. Maybe the story of the Lemurian who left the Earth to settle on another planet is a little absurd, but we need to know that their technology at that time was very advanced. Their mastery of space exploration technology might have been realized in long ago. Of course, the mastery of the same technology in our era of civilization cannot be matched by the technological advances they have created. From the few stories that are described, it can be concluded that the Lemurians were not destroyed by the earthquake and flood as experienced by the Atlanteans, but because of the war that made some of them fall. Meanwhile, since the defeat by the Atlanteans, Lemuria was automatically controlled by the Atlanteans, until finally the land was hit by a very terrible disaster which then drowned it along with several other lands, including Atlantis itself. The Indian Ocean contains a long continent from the Sunda Islands along the southern coast of Asia to the east coast of Africa. This great continent is currently renamed the former Cali. Sclater, an Englishman, has called it the continent of Lemuria. Perhaps this name is taken from the name of a monkey-like animal that inhabited the region, which is probably the first place here to develop anthropoid apes, as well as many assumptions and estimates of the possibility of mankind living and originating. There is. Alfred Wallace has proved this, with chirological facts, in the present fact that the Malay archipelago consists of two completely different parts. The Western Division, the Indo-Malayan archipelago, which consists of the large islands of Borneo, Java and Sumatra, was previously linked with Malacca with the Asian continent, and possibly also with the Lemurian continent. The Eastern Division, on the other hand, is the Austro-Malay archipelago, which consists of Celebes, Maluku, New Guinea, Solomon Islands, which was previously directly connected to Australia. The two divisions were previously two continents separated by straits, but for now mostly submerged below sea level. The division of Wallace, solely on the basis of accurate chirological observations, may even be the most accurate way of determining the position of this strait, which is at the southern tip of the sea between Bali and Lombok. So since the ice melted that's on Earth, the boundaries of water and land have undergone a change in shape and extent, and it can be argued that the shape and extent of continents and islands is never fixed in hours or even minutes. Another cause is the accumulation of mud, which solidifies to become solid rock and the sea level rises as new islands. No geography is formed, which is without a geological basis. The name Lemuria, as stated above, was originally adopted by Mr. Clater, which is probably the name of this continent derived from the name of the Lemuroid species that live and thrive on this island. The writings of A.R. Wallace, there is no doubt, and it is very likely that this assumption is correct. This is where studies of the geographic distribution of these animals can be scrutinized and deduced. This continent is what is probably the main zoology of the region that existed in past geological eras. If we consider that it comprises the entire area which is now inhabited by Lemuroid animals, of course its territory along from West Africa to Burma, South China and Sulawesi, the areas where this animal might live and live. In other writings that refer to the past relationship between the sub-regions of Ethiopia and Madagascar, also mention the spread of Lemurian species. This view is supported by the basis of geological research in India, which shows us that Ceylon and South India are mainly known from old granite and metamorphic rocks, whereas most of the peninsula is a tertiary formation, with a few isolated patches of secondary rock. This happened over a period of time in the Tertiary period. Ceylon and India were bounded by a large part of the sea, and may have formed part of a vast continent or large island. It was common for the spread of fauna with Malaya, when it was still a large plain and the Hindustan continental plate was formed, with a very rich soil and a wide variety of Himalo-Chinese fauna. Rapid immigration of new animal species took place too, and many types of mammals and birds as well. Extinct. There are also reptiles and insects that survive, or older forms that can withstand local conditions or displaced, so that between these groups alone we can find a large number of animals which may include the ancient remains of fauna from the now submerged southern continent. The affinity between the animal and plant fossils of the African Beaufort group and those of the Indian Panchets and the Cathmis is just as there have been any similarities to the soil relationship between the two regions. But the similarities of the fossilized African and Indian fauna do not stop with Permian and Triassic times. The initial plant source of the Uitenhage group had 11 plant forms, 2 of which were Mr. Tate has identified similarities with the Indian Rajmahal-ridden plant. Ernst Haeckel, a hypothetical sketch of the monophyletic origin and development of the 12 human races on Earth from Lemuria, Naturliche Schaffungsgeschichte, Plate 15. Conclusion: facts based on flora and fauna. In the early Permian, as in the post-Pliocene age, cold climates headed towards lower latitudes, and tended to be present in both hemispheres together. With a decrease in cold temperatures, the flora and fauna of the Permian reptiles spread to Africa, India and possibly Australia, or the flora may have existed in Australia earlier, and have spread from there. India, South Africa and Australia, which are connected by Indo-Oceanic continent in Permian era, and the two traces remained connected with only a brief period of interruption, until the end of the Miocene period. During both parts of time this land is also connected with Malayana. In general, with some of the previous writers, I consider that the position of this land is defined by the various coral reefs that now exist between the Arabian Sea and East Africa. Until the late Nummulitic period there was a direct, except perhaps for brief periods, existing relationship between India and West Asia. Quote, in the discussion that Professor Ramsay joined, agreed with the African view that India and Australia were united geologically in the past. Mr. Woodward is pleased to find that the authors have added further evidence, derived from fossil flora from the Mesozoic series from India, in evidence corroborating the views of Huxley, Sclater and others as evidence of the former existence of an old submerged continent, Lemuria, which Darwin's research on coral reefs had long predicted. There is one other continent, apart from the 5 existing continents, wrote Ernst Haeckel, in his book, The History of Creation. Not Australia, or America, or Europe, the source of early prehistoric human civilization, or it is called Paradise, the cradle of mankind. The most accurate indication of the source of human civilization is South Asia as the region concerned. Apart from Southern Asia, only currently take a different form from the shape of the continent that is now. The circumstances, especially the chirological facts, which state that the ancient home of earlier humans originated in the present continent submerged below sea level, the Indian Ocean, which extended along the south from Asia, as is present, and perhaps in direct connection with it, in the direction east, as far as India and the Sunda Islands, westward, as far as Madagascar and the southeast coast of Africa. We have known many facts from animal and vegetable geography that the South Indian continent is very possibly the former part of the continent of Lemuria. Sclater has provided an explanation that it is also likely that the origin of humans originated from Lemuria. In a subsequent work, Pedigree Man, Haeckel affirms the existence of Lemuria at several times as the beginning of the history of civilization on Earth. The following is an excerpt from Dr. Hartlaub might part this piece of evidence in support of the existence of the missing Lemuria. 50 years ago, Isidore Geoffrey Street. Hilaire commented that, if one were to classify the island of Madagascar exclusively on zoological considerations, and without reference to its geographic situation, it could prove neither Asiatic nor African, but very different from either, and almost the fourth continent, and this fourth continent can be more evidently, in terms of fauna, far more different from Africa, which lies so close to it, than from India so far. With these words, the truths which later investigations tend to lead them to conclusions, the first French naturalists state an interesting problem for a solution which hypotheses based on scientific knowledge have this new idea which has been put forward. For this fourth continent Isidore Geoffrey is Sclater's Lemuria, that the sunken soils which, containing parts of Africa, must have extended further eastward over southern India and Ceylon, and the highest points are known to us on the volcanic peaks of Bourbon and Mauritius, and in various centers of Madagascar itself, and most recently from the Lemurian and almost extinct race that previously inhabited it. Quote, Atlantis is the root of the Lemurian civilization in the fourth sub-root of the Lemuria continent which can be traced from cultural geological observations as well as its flora and fauna. The civilization of Atlantis starting from the early civilization, namely Lemuria, has been running for millions of years. It is estimated that the cultural center of Lemuria, which millions of years ago produced the sub-roots of the Atlantean civilization, which were located on the equator. The territory of Lemuria is very large because it is known from the discovery of the Cape Verde Islands site a few miles from the coast of Sierra Leone, in a southeast direction through Africa, Australia, the Island Society and several islands in the middle of the ocean, several miles away from the large island continent, about the size of present-day South America, scattered over the rest of the Pacific Ocean, and include Cape Horn and parts of Patagonia. An extremely wide array on the map of Lemuria is of great length, and due to its decline it becomes a portion that is ultimately only small, from the strait separating the two great continents to that which the continent has currently divided, and it is known that it currently exists. In the strait between the islands of Bali and Lombok coincides with part of the strait which then divides the two continents. The strait continues from north to west, up to the east coast of Kalimantan, concludes Ernst Haeckel. Map showing Lemuria in later time, from the story of Atlantis and the lost Lemuria. According to Scott Elliott, a series of natural disasters preceded the final sinking of the continent. With reference to the distribution of fauna and flora, and the existence of so many types common to India and Africa have in common, pointed out by Mr. Blandford, it will be observed that between parts of India and large parts of Africa there was a direct land connection during the first map period, and that this similarity was partly maintained in the second map period as well. While a comparison of the map of Atlantis with those of Lemuria would show that land communications were continuous, now in one, to the present day. The mention of Poseidonis Island, which was later referred to as Sunda Island or Sunda Land, as the last island of the rest of the continent. Atlantis, which later sank in 9564 BC, forming the island that is as seen today, with the title Nusantara. In several studies, it was stated that previous human beings were giant, which is also possible that the Lemurian civilization was inhabited by humans with large sizes. With the body of the first race of human civilization with astral forms then gradually enveloped in physical form. But although the second root race may have been called physical, their bodies made up of ether, they were both visible to vision today. There is an explanation for this in the name of the Manu. For the word Manu, we will find a complete explanation of Balinese culture below, which proves that the civilization of the archipelago was the earliest civilization that existed on Earth. It should be noted here that the technology of the Lemurian civilization is at the highest level on Earth and has even been able to live on the planets Mars, Earth and Mercury, namely from the second etheric race. Then, in the third race is the Lemurian civilization race. Their bodies have become materials, consisting of gases, liquids and solids, which are the three lowest subdivisions of the physical plane, but gases and liquids still dominate. Wheat plants and bees are from the planet Venus, not native to planet Earth. It was not until the middle of the Lemurian period that humans developed a strong bone structure. To explain the possible process by which the etheric form changed to a more physical form, and the soft and bony physical form eventually developed into the human-like structure it is today, can be found in research on permanent physical atoms. Description of the Lemurian Man. What follows is a description of a Lemurian man of the sub-race, possibly 5th. His stature is gigantic, with a height between 12 and 15 feet. His skin is very dark, yellowish-brown in color. He has a long lower jaw, a flat face, small but sharp eyes, and the distance between the eyes is far apart, so he can looking sideways as well as ahead. While there is an eye on the back of the head, on which part of the head there is no hair, of course it allows him to look towards the back. He didn't have a forehead, but there seemed to be a roll of head meat that could be tilted back and forth in a rather strange way. Arms and legs were proportionately longer than humans today, and could not be perfectly straightened at either the elbows or knees. Large hands and feet, and a heel that allows it to walk backwards in a rigid manner. The figure wrapped in a loose cloak came from the skin of an animal, like a rhino, but more scaly, perhaps the skin of an animal we know today only through fossil remains. Around his head, where the hair grew quite short, a piece of skin attached to bright tufts of red, blue and other colors. In his left hand he held a weapon, which was undoubtedly used for defense or attack. His right hand twisted the end of a long rope made of some kind of plant root, whereupon he led a large and terrifying reptile, somewhat resembling a plesiosaur. The Lemurians really took possession of these beasts and trained them and employed them in hunting other animals. The description of a Lemurian man in the developing 7th sub-race leads to a superior and kind breed, although the physical appearance is not like that of the males alive today. While the look is a lower jaw, thick heavy lips, flat face, and amazingly protruding eyes, they have a forehead, while the shape of the heel has been considerably reduced. In one of these 7th branch sub-races, the head can be described as almost egg-shaped, the small end of the egg being the top, with the eyes wide and very close to the top. Stature was not large, and the appearance of the hands, feet and limbs generally had become more like today's people with the physical appearance of today's Negroes. The people of this 7th branch of the sub-race were in a long-lasting civilization, and for thousands of years dominated some of the other tribes living in the vast Lemurian continent, and even in the late Lemurian civilization, when the previous sub-racial extinction. Apparently they remained, they did the first sub-race of Atlantis. The Lemurian lineage is preserved while preserving the characteristics of the 3rd branch sub-race. In the physical appearance of the 4th sub-race, their general appearance does not differ from that of some American Indians, except that their skin has a bluish color. Atlantis. Scott Elliott writes that the continent was gradually destroyed, with disasters occurring 800,000, 200,000 and 80,000 years ago, with the last remnants of Atlantis becoming the continent island Poseidonis, located near the Azores, which in 9564 BC was sunk in catastrophe, which is referenced in many ancient writings, including those in Plato. In Atlantis, the ancient Golden Age civilization gradually degenerated into a nation of barbarism because people, who only followed their own passions, became civilization's destruction and destroyer of life. Plunder and anarchy come to the point of completely losing control. Over time the cities were lost and destroyed. Barbarism reigned in Atlantis from 30,000 BC to 16,000 BC, when the Great Poseid civilization emerged. The city and the great statue of Lemurian. During the latter part of the 6th and 7th sub-races they learned to build large cities. With this mega-architecture, according to their giant body, the first cities built on the region along the mountains of the continent were seen on the island of Madagascar. Other major cities described in the Secret Doctrine have also been entirely built in volcanic areas. Located about 30 miles west of Easter Island, it was then destroyed by a series of volcanic eruptions. Giant Easter Island statues, with a height of about 27 feet with shoulders 8 feet further from Lemuro Atlantis, that the statues also began to be erected. Religion developed in the 7th sub-race with symbols symbolizing worship of the sun. The destruction of the continent of Lemuria was different from the fate of the civilization after it, namely Atlantis, which was drowned by a large tidal wave. The continent of Lemuria was destroyed by volcanism. Occurs due to the burning and hot dust of many volcanoes. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions are truly catastrophic more than those of Atlantis. Total loss of land, as in the case of Krakatoa in 1883 for the entire series of volcanic disasters on the continent of Lemuria. Archityrima. A descendant of the most intelligent Lemurian was left on Earth. His name is Archityrima, 2000-3000 BC. He was the forerunner of a great leader who became the caretaker in building human civilization. His story is immortalized in folk tales and legends. Sundanese people call it Aki Tyrm. On the coast of East Java, it is called Angling Dharma. Some call it Wali Jangkung. His story is a link between civilizations from the prophet Adam to the present. Archityrima until now hibernate in one of the pyramids under the Indonesian Sea. According to Churchward, the Lemurians Mu can actually be said to be a nation that also glorifies the existence of the sun as their god or helper. Most of the Lemuria civilization Mu lived in houses with see-through roofs. They are always free from stress and disease, and can live up to hundreds of years. Lemuria civilization and culture have been good at developing their ESP, extrasensory perception, ability for nearly 40,000 years and are used in everyday life and in research. With centuries of ability, the Mu nation gained a reputation as masters of telepathy, interstellar migration, and teleportation. All of this caused no need for vehicles in their civilization. Almost all the scientists who wrote stories about the Lemuria Mu people said that they were generally a vegetarian nation, lived in agriculture, lived outdoors, had a culture to live in balance with nature and the earth, and only used a little scientific technology. The Lemurians were more concentrated on meditating and developing especially. The average Lemurian nation, Mu, is not interested in technology like the Atlanteans who lived in the later era and prefer to experiment with psychic energy to move objects, as evidenced by Uri Geller in his research at Stanford University in 1970s, even though it also uses high-frequency waves, solar power, crystal energy, and teleportation to create and move objects. A research report on culture in the Lemurian civilization, written by a man named Cherve, a Rosicrucian historian, describes the tests that must be carried out before marriage by young Lemurians before marriage. The elders told the men and women to give up all their belongings so that they had nothing. Without clothing, food, a house, shelter, or tools for household use, the woman and man are then left in the wilderness for a month, 28 days, without clothes. Within that time, they have to make a shelter, make their own clothes, find their own food, make equipment, and give it to their partner without getting into arguments and without any bad thoughts between the two of them. If they pass the test, they will be married off and their previous property will be returned to them. However, if the test fails, they will run, then they will not be married off. Migration. According to Cherve, a Rosicrucian historian, the Lemurians migrated from the mid-Pacific continent to the continent of Atlantis where they developed towards perfection. The legacy evidence describes amazing discoveries, which seem like science fiction stories. The lamp that has been burning brightly for thousands of years without being treated, which is told by countless ancient writers, is one of the legacies of Atlantis. Some of these magic lamps were still burning when Spanish explorers found them in remote parts of the Amazon jungle from 10,000 years later, documented in Robert Charu's book. Ancient historical researchers found a magic lamp still burning in Egypt, which is the colony of Atlantis named Luxor, more than 9 centuries after the flood, in the temple doors that can reportedly open and close automatically, and guarded by robots. The Crystal City of Atlantis. This discovery is made in ancient documents by Robert Charmax. As amazing as the discovery of a submerged city in the Bahamas located in the Bahamas by 5 divers in 1970. Magnificent golden hue pyramid surrounded by domed domes, rectangular buildings, unidentified metal utensils, and a mysterious statue on top that contains 7 miniature pyramids. The crystal, brought to the surface by Dr. Ray Brown, it is known that the crystal can amplify the energy of the object in its path, the crystal emits light that can cure disease. The crystal is made by a method that is still unknown to the scientists who research it today. The crystal is found in a mysteriously glowing room inside an underwater pyramid with a light gun-like device shining on it. Kirlian cameras, which can record images beyond the limits of human ability. In these observations there is something that looks like an eye in a crystal that is not visible to the naked eye. It is not yet known which technology could make roads composed of a mixture of asphalt and magnesium oxide and gravel flattened for hundreds of miles that remain intact on the seabed under more than 10,000 years of conditions. This road was discovered underwater, on the east coast by the deep dive submarine Illuminaut. In 1977, there was a mysterious incident in the Atlantic Ocean related to unknown technology. A pyramid 650 feet high mysteriously glows, with sparkling white water that turns green. A color that contrasts with the dark water in the depths of the sea. The discovery was photographed by Arl Marahal on the K-Sal expedition. Photos of Dr. William Bell's 1958 taken on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean shows a spire about 6 feet in size appearing on a bottom that resembles a gear with a strange light emanating from the bottom of the hole. Whether this is the trace of the eternal light that researchers often write, ancient researchers. The eternal light is energized by an interdimensional cosmic energy drawn out of the atmosphere by a conductor crystal form at the top of the pyramid building. Pyramids larger than any building ever made in the world in modern times have been found on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, in China, and in Egypt. We cannot compete with our technology. These pyramids contain a kind of cement that our researchers claim is much better than those we use today. Ancient writings mention that the pyramid is symbolized as a time capsule containing the history and technology of the Kingdom of the Sun and the technology of Atlantis. An enormous pyramid, 10,000 feet deep in the Atlantic Ocean, has been reported to have been found with a crystal pulsating at the top, by Tony Bennett's expedition. The group also found a crystal sheet, and said that if a beam of light was emitted through it, mysterious inscriptions would appear on it. More underwater pyramids have been found in Central America, Yucatan, and Louisiana, where peaks are also found in the Florida Strait. An Egyptian alabaster structure was found between Florida and Cuba. Does it have anything to do with the energy-emitting pole discovered by Dr. Zink in the Bahamas in 1957? Zink also carried found items taken in divers into the Atlantic, and was interviewed by Mind International's agent Steve Forsberg. One of the amazing discoveries of the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean was reported by the crew of Captain Reyes on the rescue ship, Talia, from Spain. They recorded miles of pillared temples, statues, and winding avenues, with small streets branching out from the center like spokes on wheels, and magnificent temples and pyramids. From this city, like the city found in Spanish waters by Dr. Maxine Asher and later discovered by expedition Professor Akayonov, all documented in photographs, show similarities to Plato's description of Atlantis. More than 30 different ruins have been found on the Atlantic seabed since 1956, and in ancient libraries, several old maps showing Atlantis and its connecting sea have been found. The island is known as the capital of a country on the continent that spreads from North Africa and Europe to Florida, with a tropical climate on the west and south coasts, and a cold climate in the north and east. Apart from Mount Padang, Mount Sadahurup in Garut, West Java cannot be separated from the attention of observers of the history of civilization. Its shape is almost precise, like a pyramid or pyramid building in Egypt, is one reason some observers suspect this mountain is not the usual mountain. Allegedly, behind the Sadahurup pile of land is a heritage building of past civilizations. Among the artifacts that have been found around Mount Sadahurup are stone inscriptions carved to resemble an inscription. According to Plato and other historians, Atlantis had the most advanced and peaceful government in the world at its peak. And for thousands of years the earth has been in a period of peace with a form of political system that has never been matched. Respected historians and adventurers, such as Diodorus, Marcellinus, Proculus, Plutarch, Herodotus, Timagenes, Ellinus, Theopompos, and many more. Atlantis and the Aryan Race. Edgar Cayce's Atlantis series of 4 major readings, 364-10, 378-13, 378-14, and 2329-3, 364. Roughly a few centuries ago, Atlantis was in the period that lasted from 210,000 BC to 10,014 BC. Map showing tiny Atlantis of the largest Lemurian continent. In what is now the Pacific Ocean, from the story of Atlantis and Lemuria. Plato, 427-347 BC, stated that tens of thousands of years ago various volcanic eruptions occurred simultaneously, causing earthquakes, melting ice, and flooding. This incident caused part of the Earth's surface to sink. That part is what he calls the lost continent or Atlantis. Recent research conducted by Ariso Santos confirms that Atlantis is an area that is now called Indonesia. After doing research for 30 years, he produced the book Atlantis, The Lost Continent Finally Found, the definitive localization of Plato's Lost Civilization, 2005. Santos presented 33 comparisons, such as area, weather, natural resources, volcanoes, and farming methods, which finally concluded that Atlantis was Indonesia. The rice terracing system that is unique to Indonesia, according to him, is the form adopted by Borobudur, the pyramids in Egypt, and the ancient Aztec buildings in Mexico. Indonesian Context. It is not a coincidence when Indonesia was in 1958, on the idea of Professor Dr. Mokhtar Kusumatmaja through Law No. 4 Perpu 1960, promulgated the Joanda Declaration. Its content states that the Indonesian state and its inland waters are a unitary territory of the archipelago. This fact was later recognized by the 1982 International Convention on the Law of the Sea. Referring to Santos' research, in tens of thousands of years ago, the territory of Indonesia was a unified continent. Not fragmented in tens of thousands of islands as it is now. Santos determined that in the past Atlantis was a continent that stretched from the southern part of India, Sri Lanka, Sumatra, Java, Kalimantan, continuing eastward with Indonesia, now, as its center. In that area, there are dozens of active volcanoes and are surrounded by a unified ocean called Oriental, consisting of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Plato's theory explains that Atlantis is a continent that was lost due to volcanic eruptions that simultaneously erupted. At that time most parts of the world were still covered by ice sheets Pleistocene era. With the eruption of dozens of volcanoes simultaneously, most of which were located in the territory of Indonesia, formerly, part of the continent sank and was covered by water from the melting ice. The real record of Atlantis according to Timaeus and Critias. The Atlantis described by Plato was a truly historical nation. Hitler even believed that the Aryans were direct descendants of Atlantis, which led him to order the search for this continent. Plato's classic text, Critias by Plato 360 BC, translated by Benjamin Jowett, New York, C. Scribner Sons, 1871. Plato's Timaeus and Critias, written in 347 BC. These pieces are translated from Benjamin Jowett's English version of Timaeus and Critias. Timaeus and Critias is a book written in the form of a dialogue that occurs between Timaeus, Critias, Hermocrates, and Socrates. In that book, the story of Atlantis is told by Critias, who heard the story from his grandfather, who is also named Critias. Meanwhile, Critias, the grandfather, heard it from Solon. And Solon heard it from the Egyptian priests. Timaeus said little about Atlantis. Meanwhile, Critias describes more of Atlantis. However, Critias seems to have not been completed by Plato. In the discussion below, the writer will explain the images engraved on the Borobudur reliefs in accordance with what Plato told in the dialogue contained in his book. In the book by the writer of Santo Saba, entitled Borobudur Bukan Candi and Borobudur True Back History, it is explained in detail that Borobudur was not built by Wangsa Sailendra and was not a Buddhist or Hindu temple. Continues to Part 4. By Santo Saba.